The valley is quiet now. A river winds through ancient stone, slipping between towering cliffs and dark forests of pine. Morning mist gathers along the water, drifting slowly upward as the first light of dawn touches the mountain peaks. It is the kind of place where the modern world feels very far away, a place that seems untouched by time. But landscapes like this hold memories. This is the story of a disappearance, and perhaps a rescue. 40,000 years ago, the world was a colder place. Glaciers stretched across continents. Winds carried dust across open plains. Herds of mammoth, bison, and woolly rhinoceros moved slowly through valleys that today hold cities and highways. And sharing that world with early humans was another kind of human. They were powerful, broad-shouldered, thick-boned, adapted for survival in brutal climates where winter could last half the year. They were the Neanderthals. For nearly 300,000 years, they thrived across Europe and Western Asia. They hunted, built fires, crafted tools, buried their dead, and survived conditions that would challenge even modern explorers. They were not primitive beasts. They were human. Different from us, yes, but unmistakably human. And then they vanished. Around 40,000 years ago, the Neanderthals disappear from the fossil record with startling suddenness. Entire populations seem to collapse within only a few thousand years, a blink of an eye in evolutionary time. For generations, scientists have debated the reasons. Competition with early Homo sapiens, climate change, disease, gradual assimilation through interbreeding. Each theory explains part of the puzzle, but none explains everything, because something about the disappearance is strange. In some regions, Neanderthals vanish almost overnight. Archaeological layers show occupied caves 1 century, and abandonment the next. No signs of war. No mass graves. No evidence of catastrophe. Just silence. Entire populations gone. As if they had simply walked away. Now imagine another possibility. Not extinction. Extraction. A program. A rescue mission hidden deep within the prehistory of our planet. Because according to one controversial hypothesis whispered at the edges of anthropology and folklore, the Neanderthals were never meant to vanish. They were meant to survive. Just not here. Across Eurasia, early humans were spreading rapidly. Homo sapiens were adaptable, curious, cooperative. Their technologies improved quickly. Their populations expanded. For the Neanderthals, the pressure was mounting. Territories shrank. Food became scarce. Encounters between the two species became more frequent. And somewhere beyond the understanding of both species, observers were watching. Visitors. Not mythological gods. Not spirits. But something else. Something far older than our civilizations. Something that had already been studying Earth for a very long time. Imagine advanced observers studying the evolutionary experiments of a living planet. Two intelligent human species developing at the same time. One expanding rapidly. The other slowly being pushed toward extinction. From the perspective of a distant scientific program, such a loss might be unacceptable. After all, extinction destroys data. And extinction eliminates possibilities. If a unique branch of human evolution was about to disappear, perhaps it deserved preservation. And so the theory proposes something extraordinary. A quiet operation. Not across cities or monuments, but across wilderness. Across valleys like this one. Picture the night skies of prehistoric Eurasia. No electric lights. No aircraft. Only the stars. Now imagine strange lights appearing silently above forests and mountains. Small groups of Neanderthals wandering through the darkness. Curious. Cautious. And then gone. Not killed. Not scattered. Removed. Taken far from the territories where early humans were expanding. Relocated to remote wilderness regions where they could survive without competition. Deep mountain valleys. Dense forests. Vast northern ranges. Places where human civilization would not arrive for tens of thousands of years. Places like this. If such a program existed, its goal would have been simple. Preserve the species. Let it continue. Let evolution take its course, away from the rising dominance of Homo sapiens. Over thousands of years, these isolated Neanderthal populations would adapt to their hidden environments. Their survival strategies would change. Their behaviors would evolve. They would become masters of remote landscapes, invisible to the expanding human civilizations below. A shadow population, living in the margins of our world. And when humans eventually reached these distant wildernesses, they would report strange encounters. Large figures moving through forests. Heavy footprints in the snow. Deep howls echoing through mountain valleys. Stories passed through generations. Stories dismissed as folklore. Stories of a creature known today by many names. Yeti. Sasquatch. The wild man. Bigfoot. But what if those stories are not about a creature? What if they are about a people? A surviving branch of humanity that history believes vanished 40,000 years ago. A species that never went extinct, because it was quietly relocated, preserved, and hidden. In valleys like this one, where the mountains rise like ancient walls and rivers cut paths through deep forests, it is easy to imagine a world where something older still survives. Something that remembers a different age of Earth. An age before cities. Before nations. Before Homo sapiens ruled the planet. A time when two human species walked the same land. And when one of them may have been quietly given a second chance. Next, we examine the evidence. Footprints. Legends. And the strange biological clues hidden inside the human genome. Clues that suggest the story of the Neanderthals may not be finished. The storm arrives without warning. Clouds gather over the mountains like a closing curtain. Lightning fractures the sky. Rain falls in sheets across the valley, turning the river into a rushing silver ribbon cutting through the dark forest below. Places like this are difficult to reach. And that may be the point. Because if a species were being hidden, protected from the expanding reach of human civilization, these are exactly the kinds of landscapes where it would survive. Remote. Harsh. Vast. The perfect refuge for a forgotten branch of humanity. In the decades since the Neanderthal genome was first sequenced, scientists have learned something remarkable. Neanderthals were not an evolutionary dead end. They were close relatives of modern humans. In fact, people of European and Asian descent today still carry small percentages of Neanderthal DNA, fragments of a shared past embedded in our own biology. But while traces of Neanderthals survive within us, the species itself is believed to have vanished around 40,000 years ago. Or did it? Because scattered across the world's wildest regions are stories that refuse to disappear. Stories told long before modern cryptozoology, and long before the name Bigfoot entered popular culture. Indigenous cultures across North America describe encounters with large, powerful forest beings. The Salish speak of the Sasquatch. In the Himalayas, there are tales of the Yeti. In the forests of Russia, hunters whisper about the almas. Different continents, different languages, but the descriptions share striking similarities. A tall, broad-bodied figure, heavy musculature, long arms, a sloping forehead, a creature both human and not quite human. If Neanderthals were relocated into remote wilderness regions thousands of years ago, they would have faced enormous challenges. The populations would have been small. Isolation would shape their evolution. They would need to become masters of stealth, masters of survival in the harshest environments on Earth. Their diets would adapt. Their movement through forests would become nearly silent. Their knowledge of terrain would surpass anything modern humans could easily track. And perhaps most importantly, they would learn to avoid us. Because by the time human civilization began spreading into these distant wilderness areas, the surviving Neanderthal populations would have already spent tens of thousands of years living beyond our reach. They would not see us as cousins. They would see us as a threat. Now consider the nature of the sightings themselves. Reports of Bigfoot encounters often describe brief moments, glimpses lasting only seconds. A figure crossing a logging road. A massive silhouette standing between trees. Heavy footsteps moving through the forest just out of sight. Almost never prolonged interaction. Almost never close contact. And when footprints are discovered, they reveal something curious. The proportions are unusual. Wide feet. Flexible mid-foot structures. Pressure patterns suggesting immense body weight, yet remarkable balance. Features that some researchers have quietly noted resemble what we know of Neanderthal anatomy. If an alien preservation program relocated Neanderthal groups into isolated regions, the locations would need to meet certain criteria. Vast territories, abundant wildlife, low human population, geographic barriers that limit exploration. When researchers map global Bigfoot sightings, a pattern begins to emerge. Remote mountain ranges, dense forests, cold northern regions, places like the Pacific Northwest, Siberia, the Himalayas, and the deep wilderness of Canada and Alaska. Regions so large and difficult that even today, large portions remain unexplored. The kind of environments where a small, intelligent population could remain hidden indefinitely. But perhaps the most intriguing question is not whether Neanderthals could have survived in these wildernesses. It is whether they had help. Because the original relocation, if it occurred, would not have been a random event. It would have been planned. Strategic. A program designed to protect a species without interfering too visibly with the development of another. And if the observers who initiated that program were advanced enough to transport populations across continents, who is to say they simply left afterward? What if they still watch? Not intervening, not guiding, simply observing the outcome of their experiment. Two branches of humanity, one building cities, satellites, and artificial intelligence, the other moving silently through forests and mountains, just as their ancestors did tens of thousands of years ago. Storms like this one sweep through the mountains often. Rain washes away footprints. Wind bends the trees. Lightning lights the valley for only an instant before darkness returns. In that flash of light, it is easy to imagine a large figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching. A survivor of an ancient evacuation. A remnant of a species that history believes disappeared. a being whose ancestors were quietly removed from the path of human expansion and given the wilderness as their sanctuary. In the next segment, we explore the strangest evidence of all, the moments when the wilderness seems to answer back, the recorded sounds, the unexplained footprints, and the rare encounters that leave witnesses asking the same unsettling question. What if Bigfoot is not a creature? What if it is the last living population of Neanderthals, hidden in plain sight? The storm deepens. Rain lashes the mountainside. Lightning tears across the sky in jagged flashes of blue-white fire. In the valley below, a small cabin glows faintly against the darkness, its windows burning orange in the cold wilderness night. Out here, storms erase things. Footprints disappear in minutes. Tracks wash away before morning. The forest returns to silence as if nothing had ever passed through it. But sometimes, the wilderness leaves behind clues. For decades, reports of large unidentified footprints have appeared across some of the most remote landscapes on Earth. Hunters find them along muddy riverbanks. Loggers discover them in fresh snow. Hikers stumble upon them deep in mountain forests far from any settlement. The prints share certain characteristics. They are large, often more than 16 inches long. They are wide and deeply impressed into the soil, and they frequently appear in places where no known animal should be walking upright. For many scientists, the explanation is simple: hoaxes, misidentified bear tracks, or wishful thinking. But some footprints have puzzled even experienced trackers, because they contain details that are difficult to fake. One of the most famous examples occurred in 1967, in a remote stretch of forest in Northern California. Two men, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin, were riding horseback along Bluff Creek when they claimed to see a massive, hair-covered figure walking along a sandbar. Patterson managed to capture several seconds of film before the figure disappeared into the trees. The footage is shaky, grainy, and controversial. For more than half a century, researchers have argued about what it shows. A man in a costume? Or something else entirely? What made the footage so intriguing was not just the creature's size. It was the way it moved, its stride, its posture, its proportions. Some anthropologists who studied the film noted something unexpected. The body proportions, long arms, heavy torso, forward-leaning posture, bore similarities not to modern humans, but to reconstructions of Neanderthals. Then there are the footprints themselves. Several casts taken from alleged Bigfoot tracks reveal anatomical features that are unusual. A flexible mid-foot structure, wide toes, a pressure distribution suggesting immense body weight balanced across the entire foot. These features differ from both human and ape footprints, but they do resemble something else. The reconstructed foot anatomy of Neanderthals, adapted for stability, strength, and movement across rough terrain. If a population descended from isolated Neanderthals had survived in remote wilderness environments for tens of thousands of years, their anatomy might evolve further in that direction. Large, powerful, perfectly suited to moving through forests and mountains. But footprints are only part of the mystery, because the wilderness sometimes speaks in other ways. Across North America and Siberia, strange vocalizations have been recorded in remote forests. Deep, resonant howls. Rhythmic knocking sounds echoing through the trees. Calls that do not match any known animal. Some researchers believe these sounds could represent a form of long-distance communication. If an intelligent, hidden population were living across vast wilderness regions, sound would be the most effective way to maintain contact without revealing themselves visually. In the mountains, sound travels for miles, especially at night. Then there are the encounters. Hunters describing a massive figure standing silently between trees. Campers hearing heavy footsteps circling their tents after midnight. Witnesses reporting the sudden, overwhelming feeling of being watched deep in the forest. Almost always, the figure disappears quickly, as if it knows exactly when humans are nearby, as if avoiding us is instinct, or perhaps learned behavior passed down through countless generations. Because if the ancestors of these beings were relocated here thousands of years ago, they would have learned something very important. Humans are dangerous. Humans expand. Humans change the world around them. And survival depends on staying hidden. Imagine the descendants of those relocated Neanderthal populations today, living in small family groups, moving across territories that span hundreds of square miles, following wildlife migrations, sheltering in caves, dense forests, or hidden valleys where human access is difficult. Their intelligence would allow them to adapt to the modern world without interacting with it. They would recognize roads, avoid settlements, move primarily at night, and leave almost no trace behind, except for the rare footprint in the mud, the distant howl across a valley, or the brief glimpse of a large figure stepping silently between the trees. On nights like this, when thunder rolls across the mountains and rain pounds against the roof of a lonely cabin, the forest becomes something else. Older, deeper, more mysterious. Because the wilderness holds more than animals and trees. It holds the possibility that something ancient still walks these mountains. Something that has been here since long before our species built its first cities. Something that remembers a time when two kinds of humans shared the earth. In the next segment, we examine the deeper mystery behind the program itself. If an advanced intelligence once intervened to preserve the Neanderthals, why? Was it scientific curiosity? A conservation effort for intelligent life? Or part of something far larger, a long-term experiment involving the evolution of humanity itself? The answers may lie not only in the forests, but in the skies above them. Morning arrives slowly in the mountains. The storm has passed. In its wake, the valley glows with golden light as the rising sun spills over the jagged peaks. Long shadows stretch across the forest floor, and a narrow river winds quietly through the wilderness like a silver thread. It is peaceful here. Ancient. A landscape that looks almost exactly as it did tens of thousands of years ago. And if the theory of the Neanderthal Escape Program is correct, places like this may not simply be wilderness. They may be sanctuaries. To understand the idea behind the program, we must ask a simple question. Why would an advanced intelligence intervene in the fate of another species? History offers clues. Human beings themselves have begun doing something very similar. Around the world, conservation programs now rescue endangered animals from extinction. Rare wolves are relocated into protected wilderness areas. Condors are bred in captivity and reintroduced to the wild. Entire islands are turned into sanctuaries for species that might otherwise vanish forever. We do this because we recognize something important. Extinction is permanent. Once a species disappears, it never returns. If an advanced extraterrestrial civilization had been studying Earth for thousands, or even millions, of years, they might see life on this planet as a vast evolutionary library. Every species, a unique experiment. Every branch of evolution, a valuable record. and losing an intelligent species like the Neanderthals might have been unacceptable, not because of emotion, but because of knowledge. From that perspective, the disappearance of Neanderthals 40,000 years ago begins to look different. Instead of a failure of evolution, it may have been a relocation, a quiet transfer away from expanding human populations, a controlled preservation effort. The Neanderthal Escape Program. Small groups removed from vulnerable territories, transported across vast distances, released into wilderness regions where Homo sapiens had not yet arrived, regions where they could continue living, evolving, and adapting without interference. If such a program existed, it would require two things: advanced technology and long-term patience. Because preservation is not a short experiment. It unfolds across thousands of years. Now imagine the perspective of the observers. High above Earth's atmosphere, silent monitoring platforms watching the slow unfolding of human history. Civilizations rising and falling. Empires forming. Cities spreading. Technology accelerating. And far below, hidden in forests and mountain ranges, the preserved populations continuing their quiet existence. Two branches of humanity evolving along separate paths. One building machines, the other remaining part of the wilderness. One reshaping the planet, the other learning to disappear within it. Over time, the gap between them would grow. Modern humans developed agriculture, cities, writing, and technology. The hidden Neanderthal descendants would remain tied to natural landscapes. But intelligence does not vanish simply because civilization never develops. These beings would still possess memory, language, social bonds, and survival knowledge refined across tens of thousands of years. They would understand the forest as deeply as we understand our cities. And their greatest survival tool would be something simple: avoidance. Human beings are surprisingly poor observers in wilderness environments. Our senses evolved for open landscapes and social interaction, not dense forests and mountainous terrain. A creature adapted to move quietly through such landscapes could remain hidden remarkably well, especially if it had generations of practice. Especially if it knew exactly where humans were likely to travel, and where they were not. Which might explain why sightings remain rare, fleeting, and almost always in remote regions. The wilderness itself becomes a shield. But there is another possibility. One that makes the mystery even deeper. What if the observers who initiated the program never truly left? What if the preservation effort continues even now? Occasional unexplained lights seen in remote mountain regions. Strange aerial phenomena reported above wilderness areas. Moments when advanced objects appear to observe Earth briefly before disappearing again. Most are dismissed as misidentified aircraft or natural phenomena. But if a long-term conservation project were still being monitored, this is exactly what it might look like. Quiet observation. Minimal interference. A distant watch over an ancient experiment. The valley below glows with morning light now. Mist rises from the river. Birds move through the trees. It is a landscape that feels untouched. But somewhere within forests like these, across the vast wilderness of North America and Asia, there may still exist the descendants of a species that once walked openly across the ancient world. A species that history says vanished, but folklore insists survived. A hidden population, protected long ago, left to evolve on its own. And if the Neanderthal Escape Program is real, it may mean something profound. It would mean that humanity was never alone in its history. That long before we built telescopes or satellites, someone else was already watching, studying, preserving, waiting to see what would happen when two intelligent branches of humanity were allowed to grow in different worlds, one in civilization, one in the wilderness. In the final segment, we confront the ultimate question. If Bigfoot truly represents the last surviving Neanderthals, what happens if the two branches of humanity meet again? Because as human exploration expands deeper into the last wild places of Earth, the distance between us is shrinking. The sun rises slowly over the mountains. Golden light spills across the valley, illuminating forests that stretch to the horizon. The river glows like molten silver as it winds through the wilderness, and the peaks stand silent against the sky, unchanged for thousands of years. It is a landscape that has witnessed the entire story of humanity, and perhaps a hidden chapter of that story still unfolding. 40,000 years ago, the Earth was home to more than one kind of human. Homo sapiens were spreading outward from Africa, adapting quickly to new environments. Their tools improved. Their language grew more complex. Their populations expanded across continents. But they were not alone. The Neanderthals had lived across Eurasia for hundreds of thousands of years before our ancestors arrived. They were powerful hunters, skilled toolmakers, survivors of brutal climates. And yet, within a few thousand years of encountering expanding human populations, they seemed to disappear from the fossil record. For generations, scientists believed the mystery was solved. Extinction, competition, assimilation. But the deeper we study the past, the more complicated the story becomes. Because something about the disappearance still refuses to fit neatly into our understanding of human history. And that is where the theory of the Neanderthal Escape Program enters the story. According to this hypothesis, Neanderthals did not simply vanish. They were preserved, relocated, quietly removed from the growing sphere of human expansion. Small populations transported to remote wilderness regions, mountain ranges, deep forests, and northern landscapes where human civilization would take tens of thousands of years to arrive. If such a relocation occurred, the goal would have been simple. Allow the species to survive. Allow evolution to continue. Allow the experiment of human intelligence to proceed along two separate paths. One in civilization, one in the wilderness. Over thousands of generations, those hidden populations would adapt to their new environments. Their bodies would remain powerful and resilient, their senses tuned to the forest, their movements silent across mountain valleys and deep woodlands. Most importantly, they would learn something essential for survival. Avoid humans. Because for the descendants of relocated Neanderthals, modern civilization would appear sudden, noisy, and dangerous. Cities, roads, machines. A world transforming at astonishing speed. To survive alongside it, they would need to remain hidden. And yet, sometimes the wilderness reveals small hints. A footprint in fresh snow. A distant howl echoing through the forest. A large figure glimpsed between trees before vanishing into shadow. Moments that are easy to dismiss, but difficult to forget. Across North America, Siberia, and the Himalayas, stories persist of large, human-like beings inhabiting remote wilderness. Different cultures, different names. But the descriptions remain strangely consistent. Tall, powerful, hair-covered, intelligent, a creature that seems almost human, yet somehow older. If the Neanderthal Escape Program truly occurred, then Bigfoot may not be a mythological creature at all. It may be something far more extraordinary. The last surviving branch of another human species. A population that has remained hidden for tens of thousands of years, watching from the forests as our civilization reshaped the planet. And what of the observers who may have begun this program? If they exist, their work may already be complete. The preservation succeeded. The species survived. Two intelligent branches of humanity evolved in parallel, one building civilization, the other remaining part of the wilderness. An evolutionary experiment unfolding across 40 millennia. Perhaps the observers simply moved on to other worlds, other experiments, other species on the edge of extinction. Or perhaps they still watch, quietly, patiently, waiting to see how the story ends. Because the story is not finished. Human civilization continues to expand into the last untouched regions of the planet. Roads reach deeper into forests. Satellites map even the most remote mountain valleys. The wilderness is shrinking. And if another branch of humanity still lives within it, our worlds may eventually meet again. The valley grows quiet as the sun climbs higher in the sky. Birds drift across the morning light. Wind moves gently through the trees. It is the same wilderness that existed long before the first human cities, and perhaps somewhere within forests like these, a distant descendant of the Neanderthals still walks the ancient paths of its ancestors. Silent, watchful, hidden within the last wild places of Earth. A reminder that the story of humanity may be far larger and far stranger than we ever imagined.